Welcome to the Otherworlds, where we talk to authors of fantasy, supernatural, and paranormal stories. Let's open the portal and meet our guest. Hello, my name is Sandra Tan, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with Shauna Lawless. Shauna is the Chrysalis Award winning and British Fantasy Award nominated author of the Gale Song trilogy. Her new novel, Daughter of the Otherworld, is out in the US on November 11th and is the first book in her Gale Song Era 2 series. Shauna, welcome to the Otherworlds.
Hello, yes, a very apt name for my book, Daughter of the Otherworld.
It really is. When I got
Yeah.
the email offering the review copy, I was like, oh well, I kind of have to take that now, don't I?
Yeah.
Now, I have to say, reading through Daughter of the Other World, I had this impression in my head of um your background and what it might be like, and I don't really do the personal research until after doing reading first, right? And so then I was listening to an interview that you did on Talking Story, and you were talking about writing and when you were a child, and those were your reading and writing were your favorite things to do, and then you talked about ending up in finance, and
Yes.
I was so confused because I actually really thought, oh, I bet she's like a history major, that she's, this was where I was thinking like, so did it, what, why did you not consider history? Because you do so much historical research.
Oh gosh, like it was I think in some ways it was a mistake. I went into finance. But what happened was it was a few different things. So the first thing is just context of where I was living at the time, and it was Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement had just been signed. But the economy in the north of Ireland was really bad. And so I had older friends who had gone to university and had got degrees in things like English or history or geography, and they could not get jobs. Like it was a real struggle to find employment. And so it was a big thing in my mind that if I was to go to university, I wanted to be employable. And at school, I was very, very good at maths. And I know sometimes we kind of talk about, oh, do you have a maths brain or an English brain? Like it's one or the other, but I was very good at maths and very good at English and history. And so whenever you are good at maths or science, especially as a girl, um, teachers are very, uh, encouraging for you to go into STEM because there's lots of jobs in kind of anything to do with mathematics, finance, science. And so that made me pick lots of science subjects prior to going into university because I thought I wanted to do medicine. And then I realized I did not want to do medicine. And so I kind of went into finance because my teachers were like, well, you definitely get a job. And I did definitely get a job. It was an industry, there is lots of employment in Ireland. It's a boom, actually, industry, really, I think, in Ireland. Um, and weirdly, because I do look back at my decision making when I was this age and question it, but I read so much history and so much English that actually, when I looked at the syllabus for the English degree reading list, I had read all of the books. And so, in one way in my head, I looked at it and thought, what would I learn? And I know maybe now that sounds like a strange thing to say because obviously I would have learned a lot, I'm sure, because you have lectures and teachers and conversations about books. But to my head at the time, I was like, but I read those books. I don't know what I would get out of the degree. Whereas I knew nothing about finance, like literally nothing. And so I picked it for university subjects, and it was very interesting. Like I actually enjoyed it quite a lot. My career in finance has been very, very interesting. And ultimately, I do think it helped my writing because I think sometimes whenever I read a lot of historical fiction, quite often you get the kings and queens who lived at the time. You can get falling outs between different kings and different kingdoms, marriages, like of arrangement between different kingdoms to kind of bolster friendships. But often what gets missed in historical fiction, a lot of the time, I think, is economy and how important that is into why kingdoms fall out in the first place or why there are tensions in the first place. And so when I was older and started to go back into researching Irish history, you can see like the economy is everything. All these other considerations like I don't know, romance and fallings out and tensions. So much of that comes from disparity in the kind of country's economic situation, or one country maybe encroaching on something another country does. And so I began to read history almost in a slightly different way, or at least to get different things from it, if that makes sense. So yeah, my parents were very confused as to why I did finance because like English and writing stories was really my forte. Um, but they were the reasons, I guess, why I decided to go into something completely different. It was to get a job, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a practical decision, but it also tells me something about you because you went to school wanting to learn something new and be challenged instead of wanting to go and
Yeah.
have the post-secondary experience. You know, I mean, a
Yes.
lot of students here go to college for the fun instead of for the academics, and obviously that was something that was really important to you.
Yes, I was unusual that way. Like I really learned to, sorry, I loved to learn like anything. You know, if you gave me a book on any topic, I would devour it because I like to learn new things. And I suppose because I was such an avid reader, I mean, I was reading like Jane Austen and the Brontes when I was like 10 and 11, you know, kind of going up to Dickens and then to Tolstoy, and, you know, like all the kind of classical authors as well as modern fiction. I was reading a huge amount of literature. And so whenever I was doing English at school, you know, we were studying books that I had read like 4 or 5 years ago, or and um like obviously that you can it's easy to do the work on it, like because I've already read the books, I've read the text, but I never felt maybe just challenged enough. I would love now, like now I'm in my 40s, I would love to go back to university and study English because I think I would get something from it now. But just back then, I don't know. I just I didn't know what I would get from having read books I'd already read, which maybe is very arrogant because you're kind of not even thinking that other people would have other things to tell you or to challenge you. But at the time, I didn't maybe just quite see that.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I mean, it can be hard to see what the full benefit would be. I do find though that, doing the podcast and talking to other people about books, that every conversation that I have with somebody always inspires me, makes me think of things that I didn't think about. So
Yeah,
there is that aspect of it, but at the time, I can totally see the whole, really what would, it's so easy to get bored if you've already covered all of this material yourself, you know.
yeah,
As- yeah.
uh, yeah. And so that was high in my mind. The other thing is, I don't think I had a good grasp of even what jobs were there because Northern Ireland was such a small economy and it had been a struggling economy. It didn't even occur to me that like you could move somewhere else. And like now, sorry, my editor at my publishing house was like, "Did you ever consider getting into publishing or editing?" And my answer was no, that idea never even crossed my mind, but it should have. It wasn't like there isn't any publishing houses here. So no one talked about that as being a career. So I think there was like those limitations as well. And this is all pre-internet. So there's no Google, there's no like kind of searching outside your experience for other opportunities. Um, yeah, so I guess like my maths teacher he was a lovely man, respected very much, was gave me this reason why I should go off and do finance and I would definitely get a job and you'll get like exam exemptions and all these things. And I was like, well, that sounds sensible. I'll follow your advice.
Yeah, sometimes there's nothing wrong with a sensible decision though, because like it really was a different time. Um,
Yes.
yeah, because I'm of a certain age that I well remember life before the internet. And I grew up in a small town, so there was also that aspect of like not really understanding, some things about opportunities. And interestingly enough, that brings us right to, and I'm going to apologize straight up front. I'm probably going to say every name wrong. So please just correct me if I do. But Isolde, is that how you say
Yes.
her name?
Yeah,
Okay,
Isolde. Yes.
Isolde um, kind of redefines growing up in a small town. It
You
really
know, she grows up in a small island, so it's even more remote.
even more remote. And so, how did you kind of approach that in terms of developing her character and how that would fit into her story, because of her unique experience? Like she's a character that other characters don't, other people that she encounters along the way kind of don't really believe her because it's so unusual for somebody to be so unaware of certain things.
Yes. So whenever I created the character of Isolde, I really wanted that fish out of water experience for her, where you are unusual and you're unusual for having lived this kind of much more remote lifestyle, almost in the way that I guess, if some parents, for example, were very strict with their children and didn't let them watch TV or have social media, if they suddenly went out into a town or a city and started talking to people their own age, they would probably find each other very different, very odd. For someone maybe to kind of be living a very social life with lots going on, and for someone to have lived this very remote existence. I think that exists today, actually. And so with Isilda, because she has lived in this island, she's lived with Brocken, who's overly protective of her. She's kind of stilted a little bit. Like she's not really been allowed to grow up so much. But then, of course, when like kind of bad things happen and she has to go over to Ireland and travel, um, it creates all this kind of tension and conflict because a lot of the things that she does wrong is just from a lack of social awareness and understanding how she's supposed to behave and act around different people, and naivety. Um, and she's been brought up by Brocken actually to not be very feminine. Like he's taught her how to fight and how to protect herself and how to hunt and all these other things. And so whenever she tries to fit into the kind of the Irish society at the time, she's odd because she doesn't know how to behave properly. And so I just thought that was all kind of really good tension, a good way actually of showing people what Irish culture was like at the time because Isilde doesn't really know what it is either. So you're getting to see everything through her eyes as being a little bit odd to her. And of course, if you were to go back 1,000 years, culture would be odd to us as well. So that was kind of why Isilda is the way that she is, outside of other plot reasons as well.
Now, when you were researching for this book, did you go spend time living on a remote island or anything like that, or did you just draw in your imagination?
Well, I've been to Rathlin Island many times, which is why I chose it actually, because I was able to draw on that. But also, whenever I was growing up, we lived in a house in County Down that was right across the road from the beach. And so that kind of, Isilde at the start, she's like running on the beach with her friend and like they're skimming stones in the sea and kind of climbing rocks and all these sort of things, looking for birds. They were things that I did when I was younger. So I was able to draw on a lot of personal experience, I think, for Isilde.
Oh, that's great. Then that obviously covers what you two have in common. So, which character is least like you in Daughter of the
Leith.
Otherworld?
Oh, well, maybe Angelo. Um, well, I suppose the Fomorians, like they're all quite schemy, aren't they? They all want to have power. They all, yeah. power is a huge thing for them, and I personally would hate to have power. I think it'd be awful to have kind of responsibility for so many people. So I feel the Fomorians are always fun to write, but because they do things that are so different to me, not because they're similar to me in any way.
Yeah, that's sometimes that can actually be really entertaining because you're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
I could never do this," but they would.
yeah,
But also sometimes I think that could be really hard, and maybe we won't talk about why Angela would be particularly hard to write, but definitely a fascinating character, I will say.
yes,
You know,
yeah.
and there's this sense while reading like there are surprises in store. And I'll go, I don't know what they are, but I know something's coming, and I'm just like eagerly, wanting to get forward to the next, section to see what more we learn. So I found that to be a real treat in the story. But I did wonder, because you have so many arcs going on, how do you deal with plotting things out? Do you plan out a duology or a trilogy uh, in broad strokes ahead of time before you start writing, or do you start writing and then sort it out? Or
I'm a bit of a mishmash of various different techniques, I guess. So for the first era, I knew the historical timeline because it's historical fantasy. So I knew the kind of battle that would end the trilogy. And so I think having a spine of timeline, like, the timeline was a spine in my novels, it kind of kept me a little bit on the straight and narrow. Like I couldn't deviate too far away, but I didn't really know the story so much. I didn't know how the characters were going to react to events. I didn't know, who's going to kill who, who's going to love who's going to be friends. All these things happen as you're writing. And sometimes characters that I thought would be like a little side character that would be mentioned once or twice ended up becoming quite a big, significant side character and things like that. So there's lots of surprises that happen during the writing process. I'm not very rigid when it comes to plotting. In fact, outside of the kind of very basic timeline structure that I know I have to hit, I mostly just try to write. Um, I kind of call my first drafts my vomit drafts because they're disgusting. They're unreadable. It's mostly dialogue, and I'm really just trying to throw down the key scenes and see if they make sense. Once I get maybe about 50% through the book and I think my key scenes are correct, I will start to go through then and do a second draft to kind of, because sometimes it's the thing, sometimes if you just have the dialogue and the scenes in your head, it can feel okay when it's that sparse. But once you start to adding emotions and feelings and inner thoughts, sometimes the scenes don't work anymore, if that makes sense. And so I like to try to make sure things work before I progress. But then I don't like to have everything perfect because once I progress, then I would change things at the start again. And so it's a very messy process to describe to people. One of my friends described like her writing process, I think, is a bit similar to mine, like putting on tights. So the way you put on your tights and you kind of get your feet in first and then you kind of maybe go up to your ankles and then you have to go back to the bottom again and pull it up and then over the knees and then back to the bottom and pull it up. And do you know what I mean? Like you're kind of going back and forth and you're progressing a little bit further up your leg every time. But you have to keep going to the bottom to pull the fabric up. And so that for me is a good way of describing. It's sort of very back and forth until I eventually get to the end.
yeah, that actually is a really good description. I can imagine that process of yeah, of the back and forth. And um so I was wondering, like, because obviously you keep that timeline, those major historical events that you want to
Yes.
incorporate, and you are writing historical fiction. Um, this is historical fantasy, so you've got on one hand actual historical events, and then you've got the mythology, and then you've got the story that you want to tell.
Hmm.
Have you found it challenging sometimes to deal with has reality gotten in the way of the story for you at times?
Not yet, because I think it's such an exciting time in Irish history. Like this, I mean, the conflicts and the tensions are all there, all the juice and all the tea, like is in the history. And so you're not having to kind of think of other things to incorporate, maybe to make things more interesting or um, to add more conflict to the story. Like there's almost like too much to choose from. Um, and so no. But in saying that, like the way I approach this, because it's marketed as historical fantasy, but it's really historical fiction with mythology, which is slightly different. Like all the magic comes from the Irish mythology and the magic that's incorporated into Irish mythology. And so for me, it all blended in quite seamlessly, the way the magic is incorporated, because all these magical gifts that my characters have were in the stories I read as a child of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians. So I really feel that the history I stuck to closely, and that was a personal preference for me because I feel that this period of Irish history isn't known very well. And so for me to deviate too much would have felt like a bit of a cheat. And so I tried to stick to the Irish history very closely. And in fact, an interesting point is if you read the texts that we have for this time period, magic is included in them, but you won't read the magic in the textbooks. The historians read the dates and the people and the battles and the times, and they talk about that. But if you read any of the sagas or documents we have, there are lots of magical elements in them. And so I actually pulled them out into my story, and I'm almost treating those things have having happened, which historians obviously have decided didn't happen. Um, and so, almost in a way, I felt that my work felt like more authentic or more true because I'm incorporating everything. I'm not picking and choosing what I think is correct.
Well, there's just so much that we don't know, even when we do have records. I think you
Yeah.
talked about that with Brian Boru, with,
Brian
with
Brew, yes.
how he's presented um, as a historical figure, and then what the reality is differs greatly.
Yes. Well, because Brian Brew was a bit of a propaganda figure at various times in Irish history. So, whenever his great grandson commissioned like the story of his life to be written, he was someone that was trying to reform Christianity in Ireland. So Brian Brew then became almost like this saint-like Christian figure because Murcatach was the great grandson's name. He wanted to have a bit of legitimacy. And then whenever I was younger and we were taught about Brian Brew in school, again, he was taught to us as being this very saint-like figure who drove away the pagans from Ireland. But of course, if you do any actual research, you will realize the Vikings who he fought at the time had all converted to Christianity. So there is no pagan army that he's fighting against. That's not true. He himself is a war general. He has killed thousands of people in his time, and he's very famous for that for this in his earlier life for being this kind of guerrilla warfare tactician. And so this portrait of him as being an elderly man praying in his tent isn't really who he was, I don't think. But that's not how it's taught to you. You get history very simplified at times when you're a child. Um, and so whenever I delved back in history, that was one of the things that really interested me because it was so different to what I had been taught. And then you question, well, why is it different? Why did I get this version? Why is the real version not really being taught correctly? And so once you kind of push away the propaganda, sometimes it's historians' perspectives kind of color the teaching. So history books written in the 18th and 19th century are written by very Christian people, and they are maybe not quite understanding that even though Ireland had converted in the time of Brian Boru, it hadn't converted very well. And so sometimes that causes issues with kind of historical understanding. So I just find it very interesting to go back myself and really think about who he would have been and what world he lived in. It's like a very violent world that he lived in. And, I just find it so fascinating.
Yeah, we're talking about, times in history when people fought wars in God's name, right? Like that, and it's so, and of course that doesn't, pair well with our notion of being godly or saintly. So, we try to, kind of like smooth off the rough edges of these historical figures, but then we're not really getting accuracy. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting thing. So how do you find because you write very strong female characters. I mean, Isolde may be naive, but that doesn't mean that she's weak. She's a very strong person and she has an incredible journey in this story in terms of coming into her own and growing. Um, how did you find that history treated women? Did they treat women fairly?
Well, I mean, that's that's a debate in and of itself. So in Ireland at the time, it's slightly different to other European cultures in that divorce is allowed, and a woman can initiate divorce, and she has property rights and lots of like legal recourse, shall we say. And so on first glance, you can say, well, Ireland seems like a very fair country. The reasons for divorce are numerous. It can be it like is literally anything. Um, but actually, whenever you start looking at the historical records of the time, you can see like because also kings could have multiple wives, you can see a lot of older queens seem to die in nunneries, and you begin to think, well, why are they there? Is it because they're sick at the very end of their lives, or is it that they've been put there for the last 20 years because they're sort of not any good anymore, because they can't have children? Is it, they've been put out to pasture, shall we say, by their kings? So what do I think? Well, women are not recorded very much at this time in Irish history. Gormla, who is a main character in my series, is recorded, but nobody likes her. And so that is almost the point, is that you have to be infamous to be recorded as a female in Irish history at this time. Otherwise, the only recording you will have is maybe your marriage or that you gave birth to a son. You know, uh, that's kind of it, or you die. That's it. So, do I think they were treated fairly? Maybe within society, yes. Certainly, I think, Ireland is a very clan-based system. Everyone has a role within the clan. So I think probably, yes, if you're a woman in the clan, you could be respected, you could live a nice life, you could have a nice husband, have nice children, all these things. But I don't think women had much power, if that would make sense. Um, but I think, is that maybe the same in a lot of cultures at this time? I don't know. If you look at the mythologies of Ireland, women are very prominent in that. Women, there's women judges in the Tuatha De Danann. There are very powerful queens, like in the Táin, which is the cattle raid of Cooley, which is a very famous Irish mythology story. Queen Maeve is a key character, and she's very powerful. So if you look at the mythologies and you kind of look to Irish culture, you can see that women are prominent figures, yes, but they cannot be queen in the same way that you can maybe in other places in Europe. You're queen because you're married to the king, not because you yourself have kind of got the throne through your own bloodline or whatever. So I don't know. It's an interesting question, and it's one that I have tried to answer in my stories. I have lots of female characters, so not just queens and princesses. I have normal people. I have people that used to be slaves and now have their freedom. I have people or characters who like are of the Danans who do have magical powers but are pretending not to and are just trying to live within the human society. And so I think throughout the Girl Song, I'm trying to give my ideas of how different women from different social systems would have actually lived.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, Gormla, is that correct? Like
Yes.
when you think about how women maybe didn't have a lot of power in society, maybe you can understand a little bit better her quest for power.
Yes.
Because being living in a world where people are going to make choices for you just based off of your gender and limit your opportunities, and at the same time, you're a powerful Fomorian, right? So.
Yes. And so this is why people love Gormla. Because even though she does lots of terrible things, I think people kind of very much feel for her situation, which is, she is the mother of a king. She's the daughter of a king. She is sister to a king, but nobody really listens to her. Or they listen to her when times are tough, and then when times are good, she kind of gets discarded again. People try to marry her off to people that she doesn't like. And so there is a lot of unfairness in her world. But of course, she also tries to use other people for power as well. And again, that's another thing that I thought about when writing this book. And as I said before, the historical documents we have are agreed upon the fact that Gormla was not a nice person. But the crimes they accuse her of, the men do all the time, and they are not judged based on that. They're not judged for being ambitious. They're not judged for being a warmonger, which are the two kind of crimes that are put to her. Like all the men in this time in history, they all very easily go to war with each other for power, and they're all ambitious, but that's not a crime to them. So one of the questions I guess I'm putting to the reader is she a bad person, or are you judging her to be a bad person because she's a woman? And if she is a bad person, how have you judged the male characters? Are they bad people too? Or have they somehow, because they're a man, kind of you're excusing their bad decisions? So there's lots of kind of moral questions. I try not to tell the reader what I think. I like the readers to form their own opinions.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see that it's interesting with her because on the one hand, you can sort of look at her family dynamic and kind of go, maybe it's lacking a little bit here, like, you know.
Yes.
But at the same time, you realize that she's been used as a pawn, as a bartering
Oh,
chip
yes.
her whole
Yeah.
life. And so when you've been treated that way, there kind of comes a point where it's kind of like, well, why don't I just treat everybody else that way? If I'm a bartering
Exactly.
chip, so are you. And of course that's can seem it people I think people judge it because it it doesn't match our notions of what a good mother is,
Yeah.
and we seem to have a harder time as a society accepting that some mothers are not good mothers. And some of them are going to still put their own interests first. But I think in her world, I think it, makes a certain amount of sense. Even if I don't necessarily like some of her actions, I think I can understand them.
Yes. And so again, that's another important thing for her, that she was, not like a mustache twirling villain where they're just bad for the sake of being bad, or they're simply doing things to throw obstacles in the way of the protagonist. She's very much got her own agenda, her reasons for doing things, they're understandable. And yeah. So yeah. And then of course we have characters like Fola and Isilda who are counter to her. And I guess they are people that are like, no matter what is done to them, they have more of a sense of morality where, you know, their behavior doesn't deviate from that, no matter what hardships that they have to endure. And so that there's like female characters, I guess, that are very counter to each other, which is also interesting to explore.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to put them up as a mirror to each other, and
Yeah.
yeah, very, very different. and very interesting at the same time, to
Yeah.
explore. Now, I mean, I am kind of curious. You have obviously the historical accuracy is, a big part of the backbone of your series. Um, but you're dealing with a lot of languages, and I wondered how you
Yes.
got the languages right. What's your process for that?
Well, so I'm not a fluent Irish speaker at all, but I do know some Irish. I've actually studied it. I've tried to learn it 4 different times. Um, and of course, even actually the way we speak English in Ireland is, well, because English really became the first language in Ireland after the famine, I would say, because so many of the poor people died and emigrated in the famine. Uh, the numbers of people speaking Irish dropped quite quickly. And then to get a job, English was a good language to have. And so suddenly Irish from being the first language went to the second. So the way the English was learned in Ireland was to put English words on top of Irish grammar. Um, so even the way English is spoken in Ireland is slightly different to how English is spoken in England. There's a different grammar system. Um, And so knowing it's called Hiberno English actually is how you would talk about that. So knowing that way of speaking English, but also then knowing some Irish and how it operates, I think was really key to getting how people spoke, like make it sound correct to the time period and for it to be Irish. And it's like, it's an Irish piece of historical fiction as opposed to an English or a French or a Spanish piece of historical fiction. The language definitely places you into the country. And so that was key, like just knowing some of the language, living here, obviously, like for 30 plus years. Um, yeah, all of those things are really important. And I think if you're going to do a piece of historical fiction now, I think knowing these things about the country you're writing about are getting more and more important. Uh, because I think again, we have social media now. We can research if something doesn't feel authentic or right, people notice more quickly now. So yeah, so for me, the Irish language very much is embedded into the books.
Yeah, I've heard the stories from historical crime fiction authors of you'll get an email from somebody who noticed that that particular thing didn't exist for another 3 months from the date of your book. I mean, do you ever get people questioning you on the accuracy?
No, no one has emailed me yet, but I think all historical fiction is a fantasy in a way. It's my interpretation of what Ireland was like at the time based on my research, which is extensive. I've done a lot of research. So I think if anybody challenged me, it would be fine. It's a conversation to have. That's like no problem at all. But I think because I have done so much research, I guess I can back up why I have done something a particular way. And as regards the language, obviously I'm writing about a period in Ireland in English. So I have tried not to worry too much about word usage. Um, I haven't wanted, like, I mean, it's uncomparable, really, how people would have spoken Ireland compared to modern English. And so, if sometimes I think a few people have gone, oh, it sounds a bit too modern, the language is too modern. But I'm like, well, even if I had tried to use Shakespearean type rhythms and words, that would also be wrong. It wouldn't be any more right for making it sound like in older English, it's still completely wrong. So I have tried to more follow the Irish pattern of speaking because I think the grammar is more correct. And that's what I have done with the novels. And I'm sure at some stage someone will come along and say I've got something wrong, but that's okay. That's all a conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, it's part of the learning curve too, because we're constantly discovering new things about
Yes.
history. So, something can be discovered and it kind of redefine our understanding of events or people or places. So, that's an ongoing process. So, and I think it's like it's the spirit. Like, there's something about Ireland, and in terms of, um, I don't know exactly what it is. To the geography, the people, the everything of Ireland that makes it such a distinct place, and that sort of like, I don't know, inspires stories. What makes it like it wants to tell its own stories. So,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think Ireland probably in a very different way to the rest of Western Europe is a conquered nation, kind of more recently. But then if you go back in time, it wasn't conquered by the Romans. Um, and Christianity came much later. And I think a lot of because it came later and the conversion it didn't happen very well, shall we say. The Irish people kept a lot of their pagan traditions alongside Christianity for a long time. And so I feel that Ireland has maybe retained more of itself, because of its history, really. And storytelling is just such a huge part of the culture. Maybe again, as I always say to my friends, it's because it's cold and it's wet here. So I feel a lot of people for a long time have had to live inside, and you're around a fire, and what can you do but tell a story and entertain each other that way? Um, yeah, so Ireland, it's a beautiful country. I love it so much, and I really wanted to pour that into the Gael song stories.
yeah, I think that comes through. Certainly to me as a reader. And so I'm kind of curious, like, you draw inspiration from where you live, and what's a place that you drew inspiration from that you have found its way into the books? I mean, other than Rathlin Island, which you already mentioned that you.
Ooh, I'm trying to. Well, I've traveled all around Ireland, and so the Crannog is a kind of unusual thing in Ireland where you get these islands in the middle of lochs, um, that are people used to live on, but they're quite eerie as well. And a lot of them are completely overgrown now. But I had seen one in my travels, and a Crannog then is a significant place in my story. Like you're living in this, it's not an island out at sea, but it's this tiny little landmass that would exist in a loch, and how kind of isolating that would be. Um, but that land is all around that you can see it, but you still can't go there. Was an interesting concept. Um, where else? I really just like, I mean, so many things around Ireland. There's dolmens quite close to where I live, which are these ancient, like thousands of year olds stone graves, I guess, that you get, and it's in a field in the middle of nowhere, and they exist lots of places around Ireland. And so you have things here that are very old and ancient, but modern life is just going around it. So another example of that would be Newgrange, which I visited years ago, and it is older than the pyramids. And we can sort of tell that we think is it a grave? Is it a place where rituals happened? But it's on the winter equinox. The light of the sun goes the whole way through the entrance to the very back of the tunnel. And so in Ireland, there's all these like very ancient monuments that you can go and look at. And it's always, you know, seeing something like that is always so inspiring because you can't Google things like that and get the same experience. You really have to be there. Ireland has lots of castles and lots of ancient monuments that you can go and visit.
Yeah, I spent a few months of my life living with a family in Ballincollig. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
so
you
like
know,
yeah, like driving on like, like the narrowest lane imaginable to get out
yeah,
to Blarney Castle, and it just yeah, and our dolmens, are they the ones where the rock goes on top of like another rock like that? Yeah.
yes, yeah. So it's sort of like a tripod of stones, and then there's like a big massive stone on the top. So Leganani is a dolmen that's close to where I live. And I think they think it's a burial ground of a queen called Anya, but we don't know. It's so old that we don't have records for it. But I just love that there's all that history. There's a whole story there that you could create or invent or try to research. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It inspires so much curiosity about the past and about the culture. So, um, now you mentioned before we started recording that you'd been caravanning, and I was
Yes.
actually going to ask if like to hike or backpack because I was kind of wondering when you approach writing the traveling scenes, how do you figure out the time and distance and those things, or do you not worry about it too much?
Oh, well, I do worry about it because I don't want things to be completely unrealistic, like they travel 100 miles in 2 hours or something. So I do research distances between places and try to think what would be a realistic period of time for that travel to occur. Also for ships, like I research how long it would take, like a Viking ship, for example, to sail from A to B at that time. So I do a lot of research, but obviously, whenever you're getting into the writing of traveling, the lived experience of traveling plays into that. So I do a lot of hiking. We live very close to a mountain range in Ireland. So me and my dad and mum climbed them all the time when I was younger. I climb them now with my children. Uh, we do go caravanning, and we've tried to do a different county every summer in our caravan. So a couple of summers ago, we were in County Mayo and we all climbed Kirkpatrick, which is a big mountain in Mayo. Lots of people do pilgrimages there, actually. And so I think, yeah, like traveling is really important. I mean, that's where a huge amount of inspiration comes from. It's where you can have really deep conversations with people. You're free from distractions and devices, and it's really just you and the path and where it's taking you. So I like that, and there is a lot of traveling in my books, I guess. But then the advantage is Ireland is actually quite a small country, so nowhere is too far away.
Well, I find that that's relative because it's funny how you can look at a country and think, oh, that's very small. Because I mean, I'm Canadian, so I've traveled
Yeah.
across Canada. I've traveled up to the Yukon and Alaska and whatnot, and but I've also traveled all over Europe. And it's funny how you can look at something and go, "Oh, that looks very small. It shouldn't take long to cover it." Oh, it really depends on the transportation system and
Yes.
the old roads and different things that all of a sudden, oh no, this took a lot longer to cover this distance than I would have expected. But sometimes that's great because there's so many interesting things that you can discover along the way
Yes.
that
Yeah.
when you're just like rushing A to B, you miss out on. And that's one of the interesting things about the travel scenes in the book because, yes, you're on your way from here to here, but then this detour happens and these people show up and then this thing happens and so it all kind of gets, muddled because like all of a sudden you're like way over here and way over here or trying to figure out where you are and
Well, yes, and that's an interesting thing too, because Ireland was mostly forest at this time. And the paths don't necessarily go in straight lines. They go to the King's Duns and the trading ports. It's a river, like people can go by like path or by river. And so is Isolde, yeah. So she's trying to get from A to B, but it ends up being very difficult to get there because she doesn't know what paths to take. There's wars going on as well, and this is creating difficulties for her because it's not safe to travel some ways. But I love that. I mean, if you go back to Lord of the Rings, I find the traveling aspects of that story also fascinating. Frodo and Sam have to go through the marshes, and that's a kind of trial like no other. And you have the dead kind of people in the marshes who are dangerous through to Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, like they're traveling through um, Rohan, and it's a very different landscape, and it presents its own challenges. And then, of course, the forests and that. So I've always enjoyed scenery and traveling and the difficulties that that can present.
Yeah, and it adds a lot to the story in terms of the exploration as well. I mean, one of the things that was in my mind as well was that uh, it's a very complex system in a way because you have all of these different kings, and then you kind of have this high king, and it's like the understanding the political landscape of the time is one thing, but also like Ireland was united, and that's very, there's none of this. Oh, here's the border. It's so it's interesting that it was both united and yet in some ways like I don't know if I want to say it like fractured is the wrong word, but there's all these little clusters of kingdoms all
Yeah.
over, and so you're dealing with all kinds of politics and as well as the geography. So,
Yes.
which kind of adds to the complexity of the journey.
Yes. And it is a very, as I said, it's a complex time. It's a different culture to what we would expect it to be. As you say, in Ireland, there's no such thing as earls or lords or dukes. Everyone who is a ruler is a king. So in Ireland, there could have been hundreds of kings. And then you'd have had a king of each kingdom, so an over king of a kingdom. And in Ireland at this time, there's maybe about 9 or 10 bigger kingdoms. And then you have a high king who's over all those kingdoms. So it's a very difficult structure sometimes to explain to people because everybody's a king. It'd be easier if it was like a high king and then an earl or a lord, and you could get different words for the hierarchy, but it just doesn't exist in Ireland at the time.
Yeah, with that we kind of get that though it through Isolde's lens. So in a way we
Yes.
we're sort of with her in terms of like this is complicated. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
like and who is this and who are they fighting with and what's going on with this? So which is kind of it, but it is kind of fun because just watching the different kings and their lack of loyalty
Yeah. Yeah.
that really
They
adds.
don't, yeah, they don't like to keep their oaths for too long. They're too ambitious for that. And that's funny then because whenever the Anglo-Normans come into this era, because they're such devout Christians, that oath taking is a much more serious thing. And so at the start, they are like, why are these people not keeping their oaths? They swore that yet like last week and they've already broken it. And for them, this is a very odd thing to be happening. And it's a real clash of two different cultures, which was interesting as well.
Yeah, no, the Irish kings were all opportunists. They're like,
Yes, pretty much.
who's giving me the better option today? Oh, okay, we'll go this way, and then tomorrow it'll be another way, right? So it's very fascinating to get these perspectives and to see how they react because it's so different than what we would conventionally expect, you know.
Yes,
Yeah. So I have a couple of fun questions for wrapping things up, or at least I hope they find.
lovely. They
Uh,
will be. Yeah.
you did an interview on Grimdark magazine and mentioned using playlists to focus when you're writing. So I was
Yes.
wondering what music is on the Daughter of the Otherworld playlist.
So I actually have put my playlists up onto Spotify. So there is a different playlist for every book. So it's mostly like soundtrack music because if the music has lyrics in it, I start to listen to the lyrics. So at the minute, I really like the Dune soundtrack. I really like a band called Wardruna, I think is how you say their name. They play a lot of like Viking type music. A lot of their music actually was in the TV show Vikings.
Okay.
So I love them. I'm going to actually look at my playlist and I will give you some of the tracks that I like. Oh, so it's a lot of TV shows, so a lot of Game of Thrones, a lot of Wheel of Time, um, anything historical. So there was a King Arthur movie out maybe 8 years ago starring Jude Law and Charlie Hunnam. So I've got music from that. Let me see. But just I just listen to anything, and because obviously the algorithm knows I like Viking styled music and old Celtic music, I get a lot of recommendations. Um, yeah, there's a band called Four Saga. I listen to a lot of them as well. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Now I'm going to have all these music recs to look up.
Yeah. So actually, the way I do my playlists on Spotify is there's a different track for every chapter of the book. And I've tried to give a vibe in that track that matches what's happening in the chapter. So if there's a battle scene going on, you're going to get like a big high energy battle type song. If there's a bit of scheming, it's going to be a bit more like slower paced sort of type song.
Okay, well, that makes sense. That's great for atmosphere, you know?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So now, out of curiosity, would you rather face a storm on the open seas or try to survive a sandstorm in the desert?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm gonna have to say storm in the open seas because I have been on a ship on the sea and I feel I'm a bit more clued in as to how to survive that and how to survive the cold and the winds. Whereas desert is not an environment I've been in much, and I feel that I would die out of idiocy. Like I would just do all the wrong things. I don't have any local knowledge. And I would just do something stupid. I would like be killed by walking into a snake den or something that all the locals would know to avoid. Yeah, so I'm going to go with storm in the sea, even though that sounds horrendous, and I'm still probably going to die.
Yeah, it's yeah, no easy answer for me on that one because like I do get seasick, and I've
Hmm.
been multiple times on the ferry from France to Ireland, and
Oh
I
yeah,
did one of those crossings during a storm, and it was not a pleasant experience at all.
no,
Yeah,
no, it
but
isn't.
I've also, um, been riding in a vehicle through a sandstorm in the Sahara.
Oh right, okay. No, see, I've never ever experienced anything like that. So, but then maybe I should change my mind and do that because at least it would be different.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's different, all right. I mean, it's amazing to me the way that sand can get in everywhere.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so, yeah. So I don't know. I still don't know what I would say because, there's downsides to both of them for sure.
yeah.
So, and probably gonna say this wrong. The Tuatha De Danann.
It's a Tua Day Dannon.
Tuatha De Danann?
Yeah.
Okay, the Tuatha De Danann. So there's warriors, witches, harpists, cupbearers, there's fire magic, there's all of these different gifts that they have, from foresight to shapeshifting to weather control. So, what gift do you think that you would have if you were one of them?
I would always be a healer. And in the first era, Fola was a healer, and it was seen as the lesser of all the gifts. But as a mum with three boys who have been in hijinks from they can walk, like healer to me is just the best thing to have, to kind of cure broken legs and broken limbs and cuts and bruises, and all of that. I think in my everyday life, being a healer would be the most useful of all the gifts, really. And you'd be able, if anybody was sick or needed help, you could just look after them and make them all better.
Yeah, it's a protective gift.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
very valuable gift.
instead of being one that's intended to harm others.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
because
not
like, oh,
no,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, so being a warrior, I think lots of people like the thought of being a warrior and being really strong and fast. But like in my day-to-day life, I don't know how useful that would be. Like, there's no one I want to fight, and there's no one I want to run away from. So, it would be good to have, but just not so useful, I think.
Yeah, maybe not so much now. It wouldn't be, but I was thinking that actually was what I was thinking about. Was like warrior wasn't just all about fighting; it was about that speed. So, and
Yeah.
also, wasn't it the warrior gift that enabled the hearing?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
they have like hearing senses, and they kind of can sense danger approaching, and so it's not just like, yes, being very strong. It's lots of things. It is also a protective gift because you're the lead warrior for your tribe, so you have to protect your people. Yeah. So I have yeah, that's another thing. I've tried to make the gifts all not quite what you would expect them to be. So, like, even for the witches, witches can transform into animals, but some of them also have dream magic, um, that maybe you wouldn't have expected. And like cupbearers and harpists are gifts that you don't really see in many fantasy series. Witch and druids and warriors are kind of more obvious, but cupbearers can use water. They have water magic, but they can also like drain rivers dry, so that if an invading army is coming towards you, the army will be thirsty and it will stop them being able to fight. And a harpist is someone that can control emotions, so it can make someone feel braver than they are, or it can make someone feel scared and cowardly and run away. So lots of the gifts, I find that, they would all be great to have actually.
Yeah, there's some interesting advantages with all of those, but also like I can't imagine having somebody use like a harpist gift on me. That would be horrible.
Yes, because it's manipulation, isn't it? Like, and there's some interesting harpist gift usage in book 5, so the sequel to Daughter of the Otherworld. That's really interesting because I haven't delved into that gift so much, but we're seeing more of it in book 5.
Okay. Now, is this going to be a duology or a trilogy, or do you know?
It's a trilogy.
It's a trilogy. Okay, excellent. So there's a lot more good stuff to come. So that's exciting. Yeah,
Yeah.
just one random, bizarre, offhand question to wrap things up then, which is not about your books, but you live in County Down, and of course, County Down provides the backdrop for many scenes in Game of Thrones.
Yes.
And so I wondered if you were going to get transported into the Game of Thrones world and had to live one of those characters' storylines, which one would you want to live?
Oh my gosh, that is so hard. Right, so are you asking what kingdom, which of the 7 kingdoms I want to go into, or a character specifically?
You can do either. I mean, I'm always curious about the characters that people would want to have their experiences.
My gosh, okay, so that is very hard. Um, because you sort of oh, that this is such a hard question. I feel that I'm a Stark if I was to kind of pick a family. Um, but the Starks don't have the best time of it in a Game of Thrones. They're all tortured quite badly. But probably in terms of who I think grows the most and sees, I guess, more of the kingdom. I always, when I'm reading, feel really drawn to Arya Stark the most, even though she also has this like horrific time. Every character does. That they're actually that's hard to pick. And of course, Daenerys also has like the most fantastic storyline as well. But I think I'm going to have to go with the Stark and say Arya.
Yeah, it was interesting because I did find myself thinking a little bit of Arya after the fact, in terms of kind of comparing to Isolde, because there is some of that sense of like being very young, being very naive and unaware, and having to grow up so fast, but also that more tomboyish aspect of knowing how to
Yes.
fight and being less interested in marriage and the things that women were expected to be interested in. So it's kind of a
That's interesting then, isn't it? That do you know what that was like me when I was growing up? I was a real tomboy. And maybe that's again why like Arya is a character I could see myself having been, whereas Stanza isn't at all. Because she is more interested in marriage and kind of being part of a royal family and all of those things that wouldn't have been very me. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Sansa has a great growth arc, but
she does. Yeah.
I don't think I would want a lot of her experiences.
No, no.
So,
She probably has the toughest arc of all, I think. She has a terrible time. And again, that's someone maybe I don't know, like when I or idealize something too much and then the reality is so different. I think that's kind of feeds into her story because Arya has, I think, a better grip on what reality is than Sansa does. And so that's hard for Sansa too, that the kind of fantasy that she had in book one just gets ripped away from her so terribly in the story.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note, it does remind me of something in these in the story. There's a lot of keeping of secrets and
Yes.
how that impacts people as they are dealing with different things that arise, and also at the same time dealing with these sudden revelations about themselves or about the people around them that kind of change everything. And I wonder, do you ever find yourself questioning like what you do and don't tell your kids in terms of like how keeping secrets can be harmful?
Yes. Do you know, that's a very interesting thing. Like, 'cause my kids are getting older now. So I have a 15-year-old is my oldest. And how you parent a teenager is so different to a child. A child is just all about, keeping them safe and, having fun and going to school and we're learning and everything's great. But once your child becomes a teenager, you're having to prepare them for the real world. And, you're not always going to be living in your mummy and daddy's house. If, well, you can if you want to, but if you want to go off and do your own thing, you at some stage have to leave. And then you're having to talk to your child about kind of some of the difficult things about the world where you're like, not everybody is nice. Not everybody is going to have your best interest at heart. You're going to meet people that want to take advantage of you or lie to you. And those are really tough conversations to have, in this transitional age where they're still your babies, you still look at them as children, but very quickly, like in 2 or 3 years' time, they could go off to university and live a completely different life and be in a completely different environment. And I don't think you do your children any uh like you don't service them by keeping them cocooned for too long. And so I do always try to have really honest conversations with my teenager because we're sort of that age now where he asks questions and wants my advice still, so that's good. And I don't want to spoil it by lying to him. So, you have to talk about, this is what life is like, when you're a parent, and these are the concerns that you have. And it's very different to the concerns that you have right now. But, whenever you're going through life, you're going to meet people that are very different to you, and you need to be kind to them and try to understand them. And if, they come from a completely different background to you. And, trying to teach that consideration, but also, unfortunately, having to have those difficult conversations about human nature.
Yeah, I think if you start to think about it, really, you can kind of understand why. Am I saying it right?
Brocken.
Brocken, why he maybe held off on, you know, on having some of those chats with Isolde as she was growing up because
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yes,
back.
there's a lot that do you know what it is? Like I'm having to tell like kind of have conversations about human nature and kind of politics and you know and things like that. But imagine having to tell your child that there's this like prophecy around you and your life is going to be really difficult. Like when is the right time to have that conversation? And he adores her and he's spent his whole life protecting her. In a way, she has given his life meaning. And he struggles to have those honest conversations because he's wanted to protect her too much and kind of keep her in this cocoon for a bit too long. But I completely, and I think all parents will understand that tendency.
Yeah, I do find that relatable. Although, it's the classic thing of, oh, if only maybe you had said something sooner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
maybe.
yeah, I know. But then I suppose the story wouldn't happen. You have to have these points of tension
Yeah,
just
exactly.
to start you off. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes you can tell somebody something and they really don't understand it until they have a certain experience too. So,
Well, that is it. And of course, like not to give too many spoilers away, but at the start of the story, Isilde, Isilde isn't very powerful. And so Brocken is kind of waiting on some of her powers to present. And he thinks that's going to be the gateway into having this conversation with her. But she like things happen more slowly for her, and that's part of the reason why the conversation doesn't happen because he's thinking the time will present itself, and it doesn't.
yeah, and then and then things happen.
Yes, and then they happen very quickly. And as that's life as well, you think you have all the time in the world, and then suddenly something happens and everything's changed and you can't go back to how things were before. I think everyone's had a situation like that happen to them. You know, time sometimes moves slowly and sometimes it moves very quick.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, without giving spoilers, I'm interested in the regrets people may have going forward into the next book. And
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah.
because everybody's making decisions and some don't seem like they might regret anything and others seem like they might regret a lot. So, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a personality thing too. Like I sometimes find, I don't know, do like people in real life and they've done terrible things and they see it seems to bounce off them and they seem to walk through life and they have no regrets. And then other people who are so nice and so kind, like the slightest of mistake they make kind of looms large in their minds because they feel so bad and they didn't mean to and all of these things. So it plays into personality types as well as to who is going to regret what and how much they will regret it.
Yeah, now that makes me extra curious to see, what's coming.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's been great getting an opportunity to chat with you. I'm really excited about this series and now I actually get to go back and read the first one because I hadn't read it before. And I started with Daughter of the Otherworld and I do feel like at least from my experience, you can dive right into it without having read the prior books and you completely have this fleshed out world and these characters and but it's made me very curious about everything that happened before. So
Yeah.
I'm excited about getting a chance to read those. And I hope that people pick up Daughter of the Otherworld on November 11th. I'm not sure when it comes out for you, but that's when it comes
It's already out over here. It came out in September, I think. So it's
out.
out in the UK and Ireland and in Europe. So America is the 11th of November. Yep, you're next.
Okay, great. So I hope people are enjoying it over there, and I hope people get a chance to pick it up and enjoy it here. So thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me on. It's always lovely to talk about it. And as I said, like the second era is getting like a big push, which is lovely to see. And it's also, as you say, like lovely that a lot of people have told me they started with Daughter of the Otherworld and now they're going back to era one and really enjoying that. So it's really cool to see that I don't know, like a longer series is paying off. I think sometimes that's difficult in the publishing world to kind of keep momentum going in a longer series. But I'm finding that I'm getting more momentum as the series progresses, and that's been a lot of fun. And it's been just wonderful that more and more people are wanting to talk to me about it as well.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating series, and it also takes us someplace that maybe not as many people are writing about. And for me, I was just like, oh, Ireland. I mean, I've spent time living there. I have Irish ancestry. It was an automatic thing of like, oh, I'm absolutely going to read these.
Oh,
And it's and then to be able to be so immersed in it, in this world and these characters and all of their, you know imaginations and it's been great. So I think yeah, and yeah, this is definitely a series that I'm going to recommend to my sister and other people as well. So I really
oh,
really
thank
hope
you.
that it takes off because it certainly you know it's great that it's bringing more readers and I hope it continues to do so.
Yes, well, so do I.
All right, well, it's been great chatting.
Yes, thank you very much again for inviting me on.
Thanks for being here.